By 1800, to match the energy Britain was already hauling out of the ground as coal, you would have had to cover 11 million acres in forest. More than a third of England planted wall to wall with trees that don't exist. That is the number sitting underneath the Industrial Revolution. Not a genius, not an engine. A country that found a way to stop burning its own land. And here is the part that never makes it onto the poster. For the first 50 years of all this, output per worker rose by almost half, and the wage that worker took home barely moved. The factories roared. The paychecks sat still. For 50 years. Hold on to that. 50 years. You already know the story we usually tell instead. A man, a workshop, a steam engine hissing in the corner. He pulls a lever, and the modern world switches on smoke, railways, cities, us. It is a wonderful story, and every schoolchild can name the men in it. It is also the wrong story. Not wrong in its facts. Wrong in what it thinks caused what. Because the same machine that made one man rich in Manchester lost money every single day it ran a few hundred miles away in Lyon. The same machine sat idle in the workshops of Bengal, where the finest cloth on earth was already being made. Same gears, same year. Opposite verdict. Nothing about the iron changed as it crossed a border. Something else did. And whatever that something was, it not the inventor is the actual engine of this entire story. That is what we are going to take apart today. So let's say it plainly, and then spend the rest of our time earning it. The Industrial Revolution was never an invention story. It was a price story. That sounds like a small correction. It is not. It is the difference between thinking the modern world was summoned by clever people and understanding that it was summoned by an accountant's arithmetic that happened to come out one way in Britain and the other way almost everywhere else on the planet. Here is the claim, in one breath. A machine does not get built where somebody is smart enough to invent it. Ideas are cheap and they travel fast. The drawings for these machines crossed borders within years. A machine gets built, and kept, and bolted to the floor, and run around the clock, only where the thing it replaces is expensive. In Britain, the thing these machines replaced was human labor. And in Britain, almost uniquely on Earth in 1750, human labor was costly, while the energy to run a machine was dirt cheap. That gap between what a worker cost and what a lump of coal cost is the whole revolution. Everything else is downstream. I am not going to give you 3 possible endings and let you guess. You know how this ends. We live in the ending. What I am going to show you is the mechanism, exactly which gears turned, in which order, and why. And I am going to show you something stranger, that the very thing which made this revolution possible is the same thing that kept those wages flat for half a century. The strength and the wound turn out to be one machine. Same machine, different price. Keep that phrase near you. We are going to need it more than once. Before we take the machine apart, you have to see why it was brilliant, not clever in hindsight. Brilliant right then. To the people making the choice. Because if you don't believe that, if you think the people of the past were just waiting around to be smart, then none of the rest will land. So put yourself in the seat that actually made the decision. You are not an inventor. You are something far more ordinary and far more important. You own a small cloth business outside Manchester in the 1780s, and you are trying to make a profit. Your single biggest problem is not electricity or steam or vision. It is that spinning thread by hand is agonizingly slow, and the people who do it, mostly women, working at wheels in their own cottages, have to be paid. And here is the thing that would astonish a manufacturer anywhere else in the world. In Britain, they have to be paid a lot. British wages, by the standards of the 18th century, were extraordinary. A worker in London or Manchester earned several times what a worker doing the same job earned in France, and many times what one earned in India or China. Economic historians who reconstructed these wage ledgers found Britain sitting almost alone at the top of the pay scale, with cheap coal underneath it, high wages, cheap energy. That specific combination existed in almost no other place on earth. Now, to you, the cloth maker, that high wage is not a point of national pride. It is a cost you would love to cut. So when a machine appears, the spinning jenny that lets one worker do the work of 8, You do not need to be a visionary. You need to be able to do division. Every worker the machine lets you not hire is a British-sized wage you get to keep. And this is the quiet miracle of the arithmetic. That exact same machine, offered to a cloth maker in France, is a bad deal. In France, labor is cheap. The machine costs money to build and maintain, and the workers it would replace barely cost anything to begin with. So the French manufacturer looks at the jenny, does his own division, and rationally declines. Offer it in Bengal, where spinning wages are lower still. And the answer is even clearer. Why buy an expensive machine to replace a person who costs almost nothing? The economic historian Robert Allen ran these numbers carefully and called the spinning jenny the Industrial Revolution in miniature. Precisely because of this: profitable in Britain, unprofitable in France, unprofitable in India from the same blueprint. The machine did not know it was in England. The price of a worker did. And it is not just the jenny. Take the steam engine, the machine we most associate with the whole age. The early engines were monstrously inefficient. They drank coal by the ton to produce a little motion, which means that on the continent, where fuel was dear, running one was a way to set money on fire. In Britain, and especially at the mouth of a coal pit where the fuel was practically free, it was worth it. The steam engine was not merely invented in Britain. It was one of the only places on Earth where it made economic sense to bolt one down and leave it running. Cheap coal did not just power the engine. Cheap coal is the reason anyone bothered. Take iron the same way. For centuries, you smelted iron with charcoal burnt wood, and British wood was expensive because, as we'll see, British land was under pressure. So British ironmasters had a reason no one else had to work out how to smelt with coal instead. When they cracked it, iron output did something no economy had ever seen. From a few thousand tons a year at the start of the 1700s to roughly 180,000 tons by 1800 to 2.5 million by 1850. 1,000-fold in a century and a half. Not because British metalworkers were smarter, because British charcoal was expensive and British coal was not. So when you, in your Manchester workshop, choose to fill your floor with machines, you are not being a genius. You are being correct. Everyone in your position, seeing what you see, does the same thing with cloth, with iron, with steam. That is what makes it a revolution, and not a hobby. Same machine, different price. Let's follow a single one of these machines and watch the arithmetic do its work, because a mechanism you can trace is a mechanism you can trust. Here is one spinning jenny. It rolls off a workshop floor as a set of frames and spindles, a few pounds of timber and iron. Imagine we could carry it to 3 cities and set it down in each, and ask the same question. Does turning you on make money? Set it down in your Manchester mill. Every hour it runs, it replaces the labor of several highly paid British spinners. The wage you save is large, because the wage was large. Against the cost of the machine, it is not close. You run it dawn to dark, and then you buy another. Multiply that decision across a county, and the numbers stop looking like a business and start looking like a flood. In 1760, Britain pulled in about 2.5 million pounds of raw cotton to feed its spinners. By 1787, 22 million. By 1840, and this figure gets garbled constantly, so let me be exact, around 366 million pounds of raw cotton, spun mostly by machine. That is not growth. That is a change of state. Like water becoming steam. Now carry the identical machine to Lyon. Same frames, same spindles. But the wage it would save is small, because French labor is cheap. Against the cost of building and running the thing, the saving does not cover it. So the rational French manufacturer leaves it in the corner. Not out of ignorance, out of good arithmetic. Now carry it to Bengal, to a place already spinning the finest cotton thread the world has ever traded. Here the answer is starkest of all. The wage the machine would replace is the lowest of the 3. So the machine that conquered Manchester cannot even get switched on. The people of Bengal were not less skilled, they were more skilled. The price map simply pointed the other way. 1 machine, 3 cities, 3 verdicts. And notice what did the deciding. Not the quality of the iron, it was identical. Not the intelligence of the owners. All 3 did their sums correctly. What decided was a single ratio. The price of a worker set against the price of the energy and the capital that could replace him. And watch what that flood does to a single place. Manchester in the 1760s was a town of about 17,000 people. By 1830, it held 180,000. In 1790, there were 2 cotton mills in the town. By 1821, there were 66. That is not a town growing. That is a town being poured, like metal into a mold, by an equation. Every one of those mills is a manufacturer who did the same division you did and reached the same answer and needed hands to run the machines so the people came, faster than the streets could hold them. We will stand in those streets again before the end, and they will look very different. Here is the number that is bigger than it sounds. We think of the Industrial Revolution as machines. But underneath every machine was a fuel bill, and Britain's fuel was almost free by world standards. In 1700, Britain dug up perhaps 2.5 million tons of coal. By 1750, a little over 5 million. By 1815, 16 million. By 1850, 62.5 million tons a year. Look at that curve. It climbs like something alive. Now understand that it is not the coal curve. It is the growth curve wearing a coal costume. Every ton is a machine's dinner, and Britain was serving more dinners than the rest of the world combined. Let that land. Now we go under the floorboards, to the thing that made all of this possible, and that almost nobody names, because it never appeared on anyone's invoice. We have been saying energy was cheap in Britain. But cheap compared to what and why did it matter so much more than it sounds? To feel it, you have to understand the world before coal. Call it the organic economy, and understand that it lived under a hard ceiling. In that world, every single unit of energy came, ultimately, from land. Your muscle came from food, and food grew on acres. Your horse's pulling power came from oats, and oats grew on acres. Your heat came from wood, and wood grew on acres. Which means every furnace, every draft horse, every laborer was in direct competition with the food supply for the same finite ground. You could have more energy or more food. The same field could not give you both. And the numbers of that world were merciless. An acre of woodland, managed properly, yields only 1 to 2 tons of dry wood a year. Making a single ton of bar iron in the 17th century could burn through 30 tons of wood. Do that division, and you arrive at a wall. Economic historians estimate that if you had covered half of Britain, half of the entire island in managed forest, it would still have produced only a little over 1 million tons of iron a year, forever capped, because the trees only grow so fast. That is the ceiling. Every prior economy on Earth lived beneath it. Growth was possible, but only up to the point where energy started eating the food. And you could feel the ceiling pressing in everywhere, not just at the forge. Think about the horse, the 18th century's engine of transport and plowing. A working horse eats. Specifically, it eats grain and hay off land that could otherwise have fed people. So every horse is a small standing decision. This acre feeds your muscle, or it feeds your mouth, but not both. Multiply that across every furnace, every hearth, every draft animal in the country, and you see the trap the organic economy was built into. More production meant more energy, meant more land, meant less food. The economy was not just limited by land. It was, in a hard mathematical sense, made of land, and there was only so much island. Coal broke the ceiling. Not by being a better fuel, by being a fuel that did not come from this year's sunlight falling on this year's acres. Coal is energy that the land banked hundreds of millions of years ago. Burning it does not cost you a field of wheat. And so, for the first time, a society could pour more and more energy into production without starving itself to do it. Here is the measure of what that was worth. To get the energy Britain drew from coal in 1750, using wood instead, you would have needed about 4 million extra acres of forest. By 1800, over 11 million acres, that third of England we started with. By 1850, 48 million acres, an area far larger than the country itself. Historians call these the ghost acres, phantom forests that never had to exist because coal was standing in for them. Britain was, in effect, running on a second invisible country made of buried carbon. That is the cost that never hit a ledger. Not a bill anyone paid, a constraint everyone else was still living under. And Britain, alone, had quietly slipped. Same machine. different price. And now you can see where the different price was really coming from. Not just wages, but from a fuel that had escaped the oldest limit in economics. If the story is really about price and not genius, then it has to survive the hardest question you can throw at it. And there is one question that has haunted this entire field, because it should, by the genius theory, have an obvious answer and doesn't. Why not China? Because China is the case that breaks the fairy tale. In the 18th century, the most advanced region of China, the Yangtze Delta, the country's manufacturing heartland, was not some backward place waiting for enlightenment. It was, by most measures, we can reconstruct, roughly, as commercially sophisticated, as market-driven, as agriculturally productive, as the most advanced corner of Europe. Its craftsmen could out-engineer most of the continent. It had vast, skilled textile production. It had deep trade networks. If the Industrial Revolution were a prize for cleverness, the Yangtze Delta had every ticket, and it did not industrialize. For a long time, the lazy answer was that something was missing in the culture, or the mind, or the character of the place. But look through the price lens, and the mystery dissolves into geography and arithmetic. Two things. First, labor in the Yangtze Delta was cheap and skilled, which, remember, is exactly the condition that makes a labor-saving machine a bad investment. The same logic that switched the jenny off in France and Bengal switched it off here. Why spend to replace a worker who already costs little? Second, and this is the part that feels almost unfair, China had enormous coal reserves. But they were in the northwest, hundreds of miles from the manufacturing south, with no cheap way to haul them across the country. Britain's coal, by geological luck, outcropped close to the surface and close to its mills. A ton of coal in China had to survive a brutal overland journey before it reached anyone who could use it industrially. A ton of coal in the English Midlands was practically underfoot. Same fuel. In the ground. In both places. Utterly different price at the point of use. And price, as we keep finding, is the whole story. There is a second escape too, and it matters just as much. Britain did not only draw ghost acres out of the ground as coal. It drew them across the ocean. The historian Kenneth Pomeranz pointed out that Britain's cotton did not grow on British soil, it grew on American plantations, on land Britain did not have to find at home. The sugar, the timber, the raw materials pouring in from across the Atlantic were, in effect, millions more acres that Britain got to use without owning at home. That New World supply is inseparable from a darker history, and we should not launder it. Much of that cotton was grown by enslaved people. But as pure economics, it is a second ghost acreage. Britain escaped its land ceiling twice, once by digging down into coal, and once by reaching across the sea. The Yangtze Delta, hemmed in by its own borders, could do neither. So both regions hit the same wall, and only one had two doors in it. China had the skill, China had the coal. The coal was simply in the wrong province, and there was no America on China's doorstep. Now, honesty demands a pause here, because this is contested ground. Allen's precise profitability calculations for the spinning jenny have been challenged. Some economic historians argue his assumptions understate how profitable the machine could have been even in France, that the story is messier than a single clean ratio. And they have a point. The exact numbers are genuinely disputed, and anyone who tells you the arithmetic is settled to the decimal is overselling. But watch what the dispute does and does not touch. It argues about how steep the price gap had to be. It does not overturn the direction of the gap that Britain sat at the top of the wage scale, with the cheapest energy beneath it, and that the machines spread exactly along that gradient and stalled where it flattened. The debate is about the size of the hill. Everyone is still rolling downhill in the same direction, and that direction is the whole point. Which brings us to the turn, the thing that makes this more than a clever explanation, and turns it into something with a blade in it. We have been talking as if high wages were purely Britain's good fortune, the lucky condition, the thing that summoned the machines and made the modern world, and it was all of that. Now watch it become the wound. Think about what a labor-saving machine actually is. It is a device whose entire purpose is to make a worker unnecessary. High wages are what made building it worthwhile. But the moment it is built and running, it does the one job it was designed to do. It drives down the value of exactly the labor that paid to create it. The expensive worker is the reason the machine exists. and the machine exists to make that worker cheap. That is not two forces. That is one mechanism, seen from two sides of a single moment. Follow it through, because it is almost eerie. Britain industrializes because labor is dear. The machines pour onto factory floors. Each machine lets an owner produce more with fewer, more expensive hands, so each owner's profit swells. And where does that profit go? Not at first, back to the workers. It goes into buying more machines, which replace more labor, which lifts profit again. The system, in its first phase, is a pump that moves the gains from the revolution toward whoever owns the machines and away from whoever runs them. And it does this precisely because the whole thing was set off by labor being valuable. The value of labor was the trigger. Suppressing the value of labor was the result. And notice, there is no wickedness required to run this pump. It runs on ordinary competition. If you are a manufacturer and you keep your profit as machines, you undercut the manufacturer who paid it out as wages, and you outlast him, so the profit becomes machines, every time. The men getting rich were not conspiring against their workers. They were obeying the same arithmetic that started the whole thing, the arithmetic that says the expensive input is the one you attack. In Britain, the expensive input had a face and a family and lived down the road from the mill. What made it happen is what held it down. The dear wage that built the machine is the dear wage the machine spent the next 50 years erasing. And this is the law underneath the entire story, the one worth carrying out of here. Strip away the coal and the cotton and the names and the dates, and what you have is this. Technology does not spread according to how clever it is. It spreads according to what things cost. Relative prices, the price of the thing you'd replace, set against the price of the thing that replaces it, decide what is worth building and what is not. Not intelligence. Price. Same machine, different price. But now you can hear the second meaning in it. Because in Britain, the expensive thing the machine replaced was people. And the machine's success was measured, exactly, by how cheap it could make them. Which is where we return to the 50 years I asked you to hold at the very beginning. It's time to detonate it, because it is no longer a paradox. It is arithmetic. It was always arithmetic. Between 1790 and 1840, half a century, 2 full working generations, British output per worker rose by around 46%. The economy was becoming a different kind of thing, faster than any society in recorded history. And over those same 50 years, the real wages of the workers producing all of it rose by about 12%, not fell, but barely rose across a lifetime, while the output beside them nearly doubled. Meanwhile, the rate of profit doubled, and the share of the nation's income going to the owners of capital swelled at the expense of everyone who worked. Economic historians have a name for this stretch. They call it Engels' pause after the young man who walked the streets of Manchester in the 1840s, the single most productive place on the face of the earth, and wrote down what he saw living inside it. Remember that town. 17,000 people in the 1760s, 180,000 by 1830, poured into being by the machines. This is the other side of that number. The same growth that built the mills packed the courts and cellars around them, with the people who ran them and their share of what they produced sat almost still. Engels was not describing a backwater. He was describing the engine room of the richest process in human history, from the inside. And what he saw was not a mistake, and not yet a crime. It was the mechanism, running exactly as its logic required. The gains were real, enormous, in fact. They were simply flowing to the machine's owner first, and to the machine's worker later, where later meant, for a great many of them, after they were dead. A man who was 30 when the pause began was 80 when it ended. If he reached 80 at all, he did not live to see the raise. His grandson did. The reward did come. After around 1840, the pattern reversed, and it reversed hard. Over the following 60 years, output per worker rose about 90%, and real wages rose by more than 120%. The workers of the later 19th century inherited the wealth that the workers of the earlier 19th century had built and never touched. That is the shape of it. 2 generations laid the track. The generations after rode the train. You cannot dress that up. and I am not going to try. There is no wry line that fits 50 years of a life spent inside the richest engine ever built, waiting for a raise that arrives after your funeral. So I'll just leave the number where it is. 46% against 12 for 50 years. And here is the thing you must not do with that number. You must not go looking for the villain, because the honest answer is stranger and harder than a villain, and it is the reason this happened at all. It is tempting to imagine a room full of cruel men deciding to hold wages down. That is not what the record shows. What the record shows is thousands of individual manufacturers, each making a decision that was locally, personally rational and which added up to the pause. Put yourself back in the owner's seat one last time and be honest about what you'd do. You have a profit. You can hand it to your workers as higher pay, or you can plow it back into more machines. If you raise wages and your competitor reinvests, his costs fall, his prices undercut you, and within a few years you are gone, and he owns your workers anyway, so you reinvest. Everyone reinvests. And that reinvestment, this is the cruel part, is not wasted. It is exactly the capital accumulation that eventually, decades on, made labor productive enough that wages could finally rise. The flat wages of the first generation are what funded the rising wages of the third. The pause was not a betrayal of the system. It was the system, doing the only thing it knew how to do, in the only order it could do it. Could anyone have stopped it? People tried. There were reformers, factory acts, arguments made at the time by people who saw the human cost clearly and were not wrong to be angry. But no single hand was on a lever marked "share the gains," because no such lever existed yet. The institutions that could force wealth to spread faster than the machine wanted to spread it, unions with real power, a state that redistributes, the whole apparatus we now take for granted, those had not been built, and they could not be conjured in time to spare the people living through it. There were no fools in this story. There was a machine that no one person owned, running faster than anyone's ability to steer it. So let's gather it up, and then let's aim it at your own century, because this is not a museum piece. Strip everything specific away. The coal, the cotton, Manchester, the year, and one sentence survives. Technology is adopted where the thing it replaces is expensive, not where it is invented, not where people are cleverest, where the price is right. A society's genius does not decide what it builds. Its price list does. That is the law. And the reason it is a law and not just a story about Britain is that you can watch it running right now without changing a single word. Look at where the robots go. Automated warehouses, self-checkout lanes, machines that fold and weld and sort. They arrive first, densest, in the high-wage economies, and they stay rare where labor is cheap. Not because rich countries are smarter, because that is where the thing the machine replaces a person's hour costs the most. A fast food kiosk shows up in a country with a high minimum wage long before it shows up where staff cost little. That is not a coincidence, and it is not culture. It is the spinning jenny wearing a touchscreen. Look at where factories move, toward cheap labor, away from expensive labor, tracing the exact same gradient the jenny traced 250 years ago, just pointed the other way. And now watch the newest machine of all the software that writes and draws and answers. Ask yourself which jobs it is being aimed at first. It is being aimed, with perfect obedience to the law, at the tasks that are expensive to have a human do. The map has changed. The equation has not. Every debate you are currently hearing about automation and whose job is next is, underneath, the same arithmetic a Manchester cloth maker did in his head in 1785. What is expensive here? Replace that. And if the equation is the same, so is the warning folded inside it. The gains from a machine are real, and they are large, and there is no rule of nature that says they reach the people replaced by it on any particular schedule. Sometimes the reward comes a generation late. That part is worth remembering before we tell ourselves the next revolution will be kinder on its own. So here is where we end, back at the man with the workshop and the lever. He was real, he mattered, but he was never the cause. He was a symptom of a price, because machines don't get adopted because they work. They get adopted where the thing they replace is expensive. Same law, different machine. Next time, it isn't cotton, and it isn't 100 years. It's a technology you've used this week, running the exact same arithmetic on a job you might be holding right now.